All right, I'm going to say welcome again now that I hit record. This is Beat the Heat, Herbs to Keep You Cool. For those of you familiar with the Eclectic School of Herbal Medicine, although we will be talking about some pretty simple concepts in theory, I am going to be going over some physiology and talking about some topics that are slightly more than beginner level. If you consider yourself a beginner herbalist, that's totally fine. You'll have resources to peek at to dive in more deeply when class is over. Right. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the Eclectic School, we offer clinically focused education at all levels of herbalism, including a foundational program that we just updated. It's super cool. We have a free clinic that's a training ground for our clinical program students, at least a couple of which I see here. Thanks for coming, folks. And so if you are someone that you love, your friends or your family need some support, and you are welcome to email us about the free clinic, and Tiffany can share that email address in the chat. And so we do these classes once per month on Tuesdays from 3 to 5. And I think that it's the second or third. I think it's the third Tuesday. Tiffany will say if I'm right or not. So if you want to keep coming in and viewing, please do. We are alternating. So next month we have someone, Laura Ash, who was coming in to talk about herbal business. She was my business mentor for half a year, and she taught me a ton about business and how to be an herbalist and be business minded, because most of us are not very good at it. So we hope to see you all there. I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. Oh, I didn't introduce myself. I'm so sorry, folks. So, my name is Mel Kasting. I'm the clinical director and an instructor at the Eclectic School. And I teach a lot of classes. I teach most of the online free classes, not all of them. Sometimes Thomas pops in. He might even pop in tonight, and that would be fun. On top of that, I have a private clinical practice based in St. Louis, Missouri, and I teach about clinical skills and relational health all over the country. I'm excited to be here teaching for you today. So I want to start by talking about heat in the body and kind of understanding the difference between feeling hot and increased core body temperature. So summer gets here, temperatures start to get hot. I don't know where you all are in the country. I'm in St. Louis. It's by the time, the middle end of July hits, it's up in the high 80s, low 90s, 50, 60% humidity. I feel like I'm in a swamp or a jungle. And so I feel hot. Temperatures are climbing. Humidity, I feel, hot when I go outside. But feeling hot doesn't necessarily mean that we are overheated in the sense that our core body temperature has raised. We can feel uncomfortable, we could be sweating or feel kind of a close tightness in the humidity, or start to feel kind of dry and parched if we're folks that maybe are in a desert ecosystem. But that doesn't mean being uncomfortable in the heat does not mean that our core body temperature is heated. So that doesn't mean that we have heat stroke. That doesn't mean that we're necessarily have heat exhaustion. So the sensation of feeling hot paired with some other things we'll talk about in a few minutes are kind of what makes that feeling uncomfortable skate over into something dangerous, or maybe not, if it's not dangerous, at least something that needs to be treated or supported. So there's lots of experiences of feeling hot, even when your body temperature hasn't been raised. It has to do with thermoregulation, which we'll also talk about. So anybody that's ever been through menopause understands that feeling about being hot while having a perfectly normal body temperature. You take your temperature in the middle of a hot flash, it's going to be your normal body temperature generally, but your body thinks it's hot, right? You're sweating, you're flushing. Many of us, and especially in the United States, are used to around the clock climate control, right? And so we're in our houses, we have AC on. We walk to our cars, and then we have our air conditioning on. We walk into stores and restaurants, So we're spending very little time getting acclimated to heat as it gets hotter. And if we're not acclimating, that means that we are going to feel those sensations of heat as more uncomfortable than folks that have had time to acclimate. It's not good or bad, right? It's just under kind of getting to the core of understanding the sensations of heat. So we have something called the somatosensory system. Pretty cool. Excuse me. So it's an amazing kind of network in the body, and it's our body's personal weather station. And it's also a chemical detector. So this is kind of the system all rolled into one. And it's responsible for detecting a bunch of different things happening in our body. So temperature changes for sure, temperature changes outside of the body. Pressure, so that when someone touches us, it's so that somatosensory system is responsible for the sensations of touch and the awareness of someone around you. It also processes various chemicals in foods and constituents in plants, which we'll get to in a minute. This is really cool when we talk about the sensation of cooling that some herbs can impart. It's because it's working with this somatosensory system. So it works through specialized nerve cells. So they kind of act like teeny tiny, highly tuned detectors, and they're scattered throughout our body. So each of these nerve cells is designed to pick up something different. Some are heat detectors, some are cold detectors, and then some respond to those plant chemicals that I was talking about. And so those nerves grab the information and then they report back to your brain on what's happening. Oop, I'm touching something hot. Oop, I just went outside and the temperature around me has raised 20 degrees, 30 degrees, depending on how hot it is and how cool it is in our house. So they have the ability, these little nerve cells in this somatosensory system have this ability to convert what they detect into the electrical signals that travel to the brain. So then our brain interprets these signals and makes the decision on how to respond. We have something called TRP channels. They're basically little gatekeepers that sense those temperature changes. And so they are going to be like multi-purpose sensors. The same channels that detect cold temperatures respond to the menthol from mint plants and the tingliness from some other plants like echinacea. The same channels that detect heat, sensory heat, also respond to like capsaicin from chili peppers, so spicy things, pungent things like ginger, hot peppers. So this is why your somatosensory system plays such a huge role in how we experience herbs and foods. It's not just our taste buds doing that work, it's part of our nervous system. Which I think is pretty cool because that's why herbs can be so useful when we're hot and for lots and lots of different reasons. So these plants aren't, a spicy, spicy pepper, a really fire hot curry, biting into like the mintiest spearmint candy. It's not actually changing your body temperature, even though maybe you're starting to feel the sensations of heat. A spicy curry definitely makes me sweat. It makes me feel warm. It makes the blood flush. So the blood is coming to the periphery of the body, the outside edges of the body. So that flushing and that sweating. But they're activating nerve pathways that detect temperature. So herbs are able to communicate through a sensory system that was created to also detect temperature. And traditional herbal medicine systems around the world have paid close attention to how things feel in the body. So anything from Ayurveda to TCM to, the more traditional Western, like 6 tissue state model, hot, dry, tense, lax, moist and cool. These systems have paid attention to how not just temperature, not just what's happening but to how things feel in the body, the way we experience herbs in our body. So when people feel hot, we're also looking at the things that we do when we're hot. Being hot for a lot of people makes us feel restless. It makes us feel irritable. Oftentimes, in the heat, people have trouble sleeping. We'll talk about that kind of at the end of class about herbs and things to keep us cool while we sleep because our bodies like to be cooler when they sleep. They don't really like to be hot. And so all of these, so experiencing heat, part of what makes that uncomfortable is these things that these ancient healers observed, right? There's so much sensory information going on that it kind of overloads that whole system and creates stress and uncomfortability. You know, you're having the restlessness, the irritability, the prickliness, that sensation of sweat coming out of the body, the blood moving around, causing kind of pressure. And so all of these things happen. So, traditional folks that worked with herbs discovered that a lot of the cooling remedies work by affecting our sensory system, the somatosensory system. So they literally make us feel cooler. They allow us to experience the feeling of coolness without actually cooling our core body temperature down. A lot of these plants have, we'll talk about a few types of plants that help to increase sensations of coolness in the body. One of the most common types of herbs are our sour tart herbs. And we experience them as sour because they have some different types of natural acids, right? So lemons have citric acid. Oranges have some citric acid as well, along with some sugars. We have malic acid in apples, tartaric acid in grapes, which is a little milder with our kind of more traditional or our newer kind of really sweet table grapes. But when this acid, the acid from, let's think about things also like hibiscus, like sumac. So some of our sour herbs, when these acids touch the taste receptors on our tongue, our brain says, oh, this is sour. And those acids create cooling sensations in the body. They make our cold sensors more sensitive. So they do two things. The acids are lowering the pH around our cold sensing receptors, making them fire more easily. So if we're talking about the somatosensory system having those nerves that are sensing heat and cold, our nerves use electrical activity to communicate. So like acids from fruits and and other sour plant parts sensitize those nerves, those receptors, and then so that you can feel cooler sensations more strongly. They also stimulate saliva production. And when you eat something acidic, your body produces some saliva to neutralize the acid and kind of maintain balance in your mouth. That extra saliva is alkaline, and it creates kind of that refreshing, cooling sensation in your mouth, along with that's those cold sensitive receptors. And you don't need to understand like a ton of science for this to make sense, right? So our body knows what's cooling. On a hot day, I don't want to eat a heavy stew. Or I don't want to have a mug of steaming hot apple cider when it's 90 degrees out, right? I want a glass of lemonade. I like sumac-ade. We'll talk about recipes a little bit later. I want some hibiscus tea. I want some iced hibiscus tea. We would choose, most people, not everyone, the average person would choose the cooling or sour foods over something that's heavier. There's also this kind of interesting paradox with spicy herbs for cooling. So those like more spicy, pungent things like cayenne and curries, they help cool us down when it's hot out, because the intensity of peppers, if it tastes spicy, it will get your blood moving to the periphery of your body, which I talked about a few minutes ago. And when your blood is at the periphery of your body, it can be cooled off. So it increases blood flow, it stimulates outward circulation, and that outward circulation is causing you to sweat, which then evaporates and cools you down. It also supports blood flow and reducing blood pressure, right? And spicy foods aid in digestion by stimulating secretions, including saliva. in promoting healthy gut motility. So we have all of these things with spicy foods that initially will make you feel a little more
Wow. Yeah, I'm not going to
warm.
last for another 2 minutes on this.
You're Patricia, you're not muted. Thank you. Let's see. Where was that? Oh, so talking about spicy herbs. Spicy herbs will help cool us down. Talking about maybe some specific, really lovely kind of sour herbs. Ones that I especially like for kind of the short term, kind of quick cooling off. We talked about lemonade and sumac berries. So the sumac berries make a wonderful lemonade. It's been a traditional Southern remedy for heat, for summer heat for generations. You can use any tart, acidic fruit for cooling. But remember that the sour cooling feeling is going to be more temporary. You're going to drink a tart drink and feel cooled for a few minutes, and then those things are going to come back. So sipping, like nibbling or sipping on tart drinks regularly throughout the day when you're hot works a lot better than just eating one whole big piece of fruit and hoping that it cools you off for the rest of the day. Thomas really likes, I think he calls it his summer chill recipe. He likes a combination of sumac berries, lemons, limes, and spearmint to make a big batch of kind of cooling iced tea for hot days, kind of if you're working outside. That spearmint also contains a menthol, which directly activates your cold sensors for an extra boost of the sensations of cooling. Hibiscus is my personal favorite in terms of sour, kind of flavonoid rich herbs. It has a really long history of use as an herb for cooling. It's been used for iced tea. Agua de Jamaica is an hibiscus tea. There's often cinnamon sticks added. That gives you a little bit of that kind of peripheral blood flow without it being spicy. So making a big jar of hibiscus cinnamon tea, it can be a really awesome way to enjoy some wonderful cooling herbs. In addition, hibiscus is really great. It's flavonoid rich. It has a really long history of being used topically and internally. So on top of making yourself a lovely tea, as long as it doesn't have a ton of sugar in it, you can use it on your skin as well. It promotes epithelialization on the skin, and it can help to nourish your skin barrier. So it's nourishing that acid mantle on your skin, which can make it in mild sunburn, not when the skin is broken, of course, but also something that happens when we're hot and in the sun. Sometimes some folks can get sunburned. And so hibiscus can be drunk and used as a part of an herbal like topical tea or compress for heat and irritation on the skin. Another favorite, Thomas and I both really love peach as a cooling remedy for more deep, persistent heat. So when heat runs deeper and lasts longer, um, peach can be a little more effective than sour remedies alone. So this is both the fruit, eating the fruit, the juice, and the leaves, twigs, and pits are all used as cooling remedies. The leaves, twigs, and pits also have a gentle bitterness, especially the leaves, and there is some sourness, which can be helpful for those sensations of heat. Peach is especially good for those signs of irritation, those signs of heat, redness, restlessness, irritation, overstimulation. And so you can make, if you have access to a peach tree or know someone that has a peach tree, a couple of leaves mixed with whatever, iced tea blend you're going to make can be really, really helpful to keep you cool for a little bit longer. You can also make a tincture out of a mixture of the leaves, twigs, and pits. The pits are strongest. Leaves are the least strong. Twigs are kind of in the middle, and you can kind of mix it up. Um, and so the dose for a tincture of the pits is somewhere between 10 and 30 drops because it's the strongest. And the leaves and twigs, the dosage is 2 to 3 mils, two to three droppers. We make a tincture with either fresh or freshly dried peach leaves. And we do a 1 to 2 ratio at 40% alcohol. We'll give you the recipe for that. So it's really important um, that to not make medicine or make tea out of peach leaves, twigs, or pits, less the pits, when they are wilted. So we want to tincture them fresh. We want to make tea out of them fresh or wait until they're lightly dry, they're dried to make that because they have cryogenic glycosides, part of which is, we're using for that cooling effect, completely safe in moderation. But that amygdalin, so that compound comes out when it's wilted and it's the strongest. So we're going to shift gears and talk a little bit about, excuse me, a little bit about actually being, your body temperature going up. So thinking about heat exhaustion, heat stroke, and kind of recognizing those signs and those warning signs. So heat exhaustion usually shows up through several symptoms that are generally happening together. So we're looking at heavy sweating, not just light sweating. And this is heavy sweating when someone is sitting down. It's normal when you're in the heat and you're being physically active to sweat heavily. But if you're sweating heavily at rest, your body is working kind of overtime to cool you down. Along with that heavy sweating, you're likely going to see weakness, fatigue that can get extreme as the heat exhaustion gets worse. You can feel dizziness or faintness. Some folks get headaches and nausea. And as it gets worse, folks will have rapid heartbeat. So your heart is having to work harder to pump blood. And you'll have that orthostatic hypotension, so that low blood pressure when you're kind of standing up and making you feel dizzy when you go from sitting to standing. You'll also get muscle cramps, and as you get dehydrated, you'll see dark colored urine. So if you're in the heat and you pee and it's dark color, that's a clear sign that you're heading towards dehydration. So if you're noticing several of these symptoms, especially during hot weather or after physical activity, it's important to take them seriously. It's way easier to prevent heat stroke, heat exhaustion than it is to support it once someone is already there. Excuse me. So our bodies have this built-in thermostat, this thermoregulation I mentioned briefly in the beginning. And it's a pretty sophisticated thermostat system. When our temperature rises from hot weather, from physical activity, somewhat from a fever, our hypothalamus, so this part of our brain, acts as the master thermostat. It detects the temperature change and immediately wants to start the cooling process. Our main cooling method is sweating. Sweat is a mixture of water, sodium, and small amounts of other minerals. So we're sweating out a mixture of salt, water, and electrolytes. And when sweat evaporates on our skin, it takes some of the heat with it, cooling our bodies down. But this is what we're kind of part of the problem can start. And what we can, really find in terms of a key herbal interventions here is that if you're sweating heavily, but you're not replacing fluids and electrolytes when you're sweating, your body's cooling system begins to break down and isn't going to work as efficiently. And that can start to happen before heat exhaustion. right? So if we're sweating, and all of a sudden we're still really hot, but we're not sweating enough, our urine starts to become a little bit darker. We know that where we need some of those electrolytes along with some salt and more fluids in general. So when we get dehydrated, our blood volume drops. Um, this means less blood is available to carry oxygen and nutrients to your cells. And when cells don't get enough oxygen, they have to switch from their preferred way of making energy to a backup system, which doesn't use oxygen if they don't have enough oxygen. It works, but it produces a lot more waste products and can interfere with normal cell function after a while. So basically, it's like our cells are switching from clean burning fuel to a less efficient one that produces more exhaust. If we're thinking kind of about a car. And then when our body experiences heat stress, so if our bodies aren't able to keep us as cool as we need to be, it activates these really special, interesting protein called heat shock proteins. And these are kind of the little emergency repair crew of the thermoregulation system. So these proteins work hard to protect other proteins from heat damage. So they're making sure that proteins aren't getting denatured in the heat. Proteins do a lot of things in our body. But when stress heat continues for too long, even that protective system can become overwhelmed. And when that happens, proteins can start to break down and cells can die, which is when heat exhaustion can prevent to that most dangerous form of being overheated. So we're thinking about heat stroke. And heat exhaustion can come on pretty quickly, especially if folks aren't minding the need for electrolytes as well as just fluids. So when the air is really humid, so if it's hot with really high humidity, sweat can't evaporate as efficiently. So that makes our body's main cooling system a little bit more effective. So when it's really hot with really high humidity, we want to pay a little bit more attention to making sure that we're maybe circulating the air around our bodies as much as we can be. Um, Being dehydrated, even mildly, when you're starting out. So if you haven't had enough fluids throughout the day and then you go out for a long afternoon of yard work in the hot, hot heat, um, that already low fluids can put you at a disadvantage in terms of being able to keep up with the heat as it progresses. People wearing too much clothing. So it's really important to protect our bodies from the sun, right? Of course, because if we're out for a long time, then we could get a sunburn. But also, too many layers of clothing traps heat and allows that sweat to not evaporate as well. If we're using layers for the sun, we want to make sure that they're loose layers. And that they're of a material that will allow for sweat to evaporate. Alcohol consumption is another way that folks can get heat exhaustion pretty quickly. So drinking alcohol dehydrates us and it impairs our body's temperature regulation process in general. And then folks with certain medical conditions. So people that have heart, lung, or kidney diseases, a lot of them, any condition that can cause fevers, kind of intermittent fevers, can make it harder for their bodies to regulate body temperature, and they need to pay a lot more attention. We also have to think about folks that are older, really, really young, babies and small children, and anyone in general that has a weakened immune system or has just gone through a long illness. So if someone's vital force, if someone's if they've been dealing with a lot, whether that's, from an illness or like an acute, infection or a disease and they're healing, they're going to need to pay more attention to this. So our best approaches for this is to stay consistently hydrated. And we are going to talk about some mineral-rich herbal infusions and some homemade herbal electrolyte sort of recipes that can help with that. And of course, avoiding our intense activities during peak heat, dressing appropriately, taking regular herbal tea breaks. So I like to tell folks that are especially folks that are prone to kind of heat exhaustion and overheating, that when you drink, try to take a break, even if it's 10 seconds. Step out of the sun, step into the shade, maybe sit down, take a couple of deep breaths, and do some mindfulness, with your cooling beverage. And even small breaks can be really, really helpful. If someone is showing some of those more severe signs of heat exhaustion, we always like to say it's important to take them to a cooler space, lie them down, remove excess clothing, and offer small sips, not guzzling, of cool water. If their symptoms don't start to improve, or if they're vomiting more than once or twice, then they need to go to urgent care or the emergency room, especially if they're starting to seem confused and disoriented, because this can indicate serious heat stroke, and that heat stroke is a medical emergency. So I've been mentioning electrolytes. I just want to talk a little bit about what they are for folks who aren't familiar before we talk about some herbs and some herbal recipes. Excuse me. Electrolytes are minerals like sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium. So they're a lot more important than some folks realize. So these minerals, the electrolytes are these minerals that carry electrical charges that allow them to conduct electrical pulses, which our body needs for muscle contractions, including our heart muscle, nerve signaling, so that communication between your brain and your body, and it's a part of, not all of, but a part of maintaining fluid balance in the body. So keeping fluid in the right places in our bodies. So like I said, when we sweat, we lose electrolytes along with water. That's why drinking plain water won't replace the minerals when we're sweating heavily. That's why someone can drink lots and lots of water and still feel terrible when they're out and about and they're hot and sweaty for long periods of time. So we really like mineral-rich herbal infusions to act as a base for a homemade electrolyte solution. We will have a recipe for you. It's basically about a liter of water, half a teaspoon of salt, 6 teaspoons of sugar, and oftentimes it's really nice to add in a cup of like fresh orange juice, lemon juice, or even coconut water, so something like that. And so that liter, that 4 cups of water, is where the herbs can really shine. So we can use some of those herbs that we talked about for sensations of cooling, the hibiscus, the sumac, and maybe even a little bit of peach, peach tincture, or throw a couple peach leaves into your tea. But on top of that, we really like the mineral-rich infusions. So this is kind of nature's hydration boosters because they have some of those minerals in them. Our favorite, so some of my favorite really easily accessible and tasty mineral-rich herbs for summer hydration is red raspberry leaf. It has a ton of magnesium and potassium. Magnesium and potassium are really important for preventing muscle cramping when you're out working in the heat or out playing in the heat. Raspberry leaf, for those that haven't experienced it, it has a very mild, pleasant taste. It's naturally cooling. It doesn't have as much sourness, of course, as raspberry fruits, but it does have a small amount of sourness along with that high mineral content. I also really love lemon balm. Lemon balm is covering a few of our bases here, right? So it's a great source of potassium. It has a lovely flavor. It has natural compounds that kind of help ease anxiety and promote relaxation without being sedated. It's kind of that kind of calm focus. And so that can be really helpful if you're grumpy, right? If you're like, okay, I have to be out here in this heat, maybe it's someone's ball game or, whatever reason that you're out in the heat that you don't want to, that can make us grumpy. So along with lemon balm having a lot of minerals and tasting delicious, it can make us feel less stressed or less agitated in the heat. And then spearmint, which is one of my all-time favorite herbs. High in calcium, potassium, and magnesium. Spearmint helps with hydration, and we have those menthol compounds that activate our cold sensing somatosensory nerves as well, like we talked about in the beginning. So you need to add sugar to your electrolytes. This is not as important day to day if we're just sitting in our house and maybe we haven't drank water all day and we want to just get day to day hydrated. Although a little bit of sugar is always going to help. It is very, very important um, to have real sweetener in our electrolyte mixes for if we're trying to prevent heat exhaustion and heat stroke, and we're trying to work with electrolyte balance. I know sugar is getting exceptionally demonized in our culture, in the US culture right now. Our kind of philosophy on sugar is moderation. Sugar isn't good for us in large amounts. In small amounts, it's totally fine for folks that aren't diabetic and aren't managing well. There are people that should not have sugar, but overall, a little bit of sugar is not, it's not addictive and it's not going to cause issues, especially when you're using it for this purpose. And that's why our electrolyte solution has sugar in it. I use plain raw sugar generally in my electrolyte mixes. You can also use honey if you want, or maple syrup, or one of the other things. Um, I like the plain sugar because doesn't it doesn't give its own taste. It's a very neutral, clean taste that'll let all the herbs really shine through. So our body has this kind of complicated, very sophisticated system. It's called the sodium glucose co-transport mechanism. So basically, our intestines are designed to absorb the glucose from sugar and sodium at the same time. And so when glucose is present, it's going to help our body absorb sodium more efficiently. Sodium, one of our electrolytes, right? Salt is not Sodium is not the only one, but it's really important. So when sodium gets absorbed, it pulls the water, and in that sense, the liquid from these electrolyte mixes that we're making, and the minerals, it pulls the water along with it. And then, that water, as it gets filtered in our digestive tract, eventually makes it to the bloodstream. So that's why properly formulated rehydration drinks. So the drinks that are really specific for preventing heat exhaustion and dehydration when people are sweating. That's why they're all sweetened. So things like the unsweetened ones are the ones that are sweetened with kind of fake sugars, or those are the ones that are good for that are fine for day to day, right? But if you're using things, I love elements, I love some of those for kind of day to day. They add a little bit of flavor, you're getting a little bit of minerals in. But if your goal is to keep yourself cool and prevent dehydration, just know that even if you're using those elements and in kind of the some of those mixes that you can get, add a little bit of extra sugar in. You likely do not need to add any more sodium into those little premix, the little premixes. But if it doesn't have real sugar, put a little bit of real sweetener in, so that you can kind of up the ability of your body to absorb through that kind of glucose sodium connection in your digestive tract. Okay, we're trucking through here. Does anybody have any questions? I'm going to shift gears and start talking about skin, some herbs for hot heat and skin, and some sleep stuff. But I want to make sure that everyone gets their questions answered about what I've talked about so far. Oh, Heidi's sharing, when you experience heat exhaustion, you're at a greater risk of having repeat episodes. Yes, that is true. Alicia.
Hi, I have a question about dehydration.
Hmm.
So I live in Las Vegas. It's like 108.9, so I'm very happy that you're having this right now, learning a lot. Um, but I wanted to know if there's a difference between dehydration when you're like out in the sun versus dehydration when you're sick. Like if you've got the stomach flu or something like that, and you're like Are those treated differently? Are they different in the body?
So the only difference, so we have heat exhaustion, right? So is a mixture of, dehydration and becoming actually becoming overheated, right? So we have that combo of exhausting our thermoregulatory system, like sweating so much that we're losing those electrolytes. And then dehydrating means not enough fluid in the body overall. So it's similar because also if you have a fever, your thermoregulatory system is working overtime. So I say pretty much yes. If someone has a high fever and they're sweating, if someone has a high fever and they're not sweating, give them some things to help them sweat because they should be sweating to help break their fever. But it's basically the same. You're likely sweating less for shorter periods of time. But I would use the same kind of rehydration. I would still give folks a little bit of sugar in with their hydration and the same electrolytes especially if there's a lot of sweat involved. Yeah, thanks for the question. It was a really good one. Just looking at all right. Let's talk about summer skin health. I really like talking about skin. It's one of my strongest herbal interests. And I like kind of talking about how summer heat affects our skin. And if we can kind of think about that in a bunch of different ways. So we just talked about increased sweating, which happens when we're hot. It's so helpful for cooling us down, but a lot of sweating can cause irritation, especially in folks with sensitive skin. So people with sensitive skin, people with rosacea, eczema, psoriasis, so people with skin conditions, that increased sweating can cause irritation. It can dry us out in the long run because we have that salt on our skin, which is dry. Salt is osmotic. So if we have a dried layer of salt on our skin, that can be kind of pulling the moisture out of our top layer of skin. It can contribute to clogged pores, breakouts, heat rashes, especially in areas where sweat gets trapped, like skin folds, and like folks under breasts and between our hips and under our tummies and things like that. And so, although we need sweat and we love sweat because sweat is what keeps us cool, it's an important part of our thermoregulatory system. It can cause some problems for our skin. Um, Also, we have the sun. So everyone's had a sunburn. We're all going to be exposed to the sun. Sunburn can cause, damage to the skin long term. We want to do our best to avoid kind of that long-term damage from UV rays. Some folks are against sunscreen, some folks aren't. I'm a sunscreen proponent. I use and suggest that my clients use barrier zinc, so not micronized zinc, but the people are covered up either with that physical barrier or with clothes. I tell folks, because I know that also sun gives us vitamin D. Sun makes us feel good. Sun regulates our circadian rhythm and allows us to sleep. So it is important to get some sun that's not completely covered with sunscreen. I tell folks to do morning sun, right? So if you're one of those folks that utilizes the sun as part of your mental health, your physical health, or if you're low on vitamin D and you need to spend more time in the sun, doing it in the morning on as much of your body as possible, and then not washing for an hour or so afterwards, that can affect the utilization of vitamin D in the body. And then when you're going out for the day, if you end up going out for the day, then putting kind of that sunscreen at least on those high touch areas of the body, your face, your kind of shoulders, ears, and the back of the neck. Oh, we got some questions actually now that I'm peeking. For folks that find raspberry leaves, raspberry leaves are mildly astringent. Some folks that are already pretty dry we can experience that as drying. I always tell folks to add some moistening herbs in with it. So something that has a little bit of slime to it. Marshmallow root, marshmallow leaf seems to be less slimy, but also almost as moisturizing. Um, yep. So add something, one of our demulcents to just a little bit. Will offset that dryness. Mm. Raspberry leaf. Raspberry leaf is not a true diuretic. I think a lot of that has to do with the minerals, and the kind of increased utilization of fluid because it has electrolytes in it. I don't think that it is a true diuretic. It has that kind of gentle astringency, but I wouldn't worry about adding a little bit of raspberry leaf to an electrolyte mix, because it has so many minerals that'll kind of offset that. Yes, small amounts of aloe, absolutely. Aloe is very cooling. It's super hydrating, it's super moistening. In some parts of the country, I just spent 6 months in Phoenix, and you could just like go, there were like tons of little stores and they had aloe growing, and they would kind of cut a piece off for you and strip it and kind of squish it. It was amazing. It was fantastic. Um, and so absolutely adding a little bit of aloe. If you have an aloe plant and you want to add the gel to your drink, do not add the outside of the aloe. It will make you poop a lot, a lot. Um, so just make sure you're using kind of that inside goo. And you're either, kind of smushing it up. You can use a mortar and pestle. You can use a blender. I think that that light flavor of aloe and that moistening is perfect, is absolutely perfect. How do I feel about blackberry? So blackberry root is it's very astringent, not used for hydration. I use it for other things, like maybe people that are peeing too much, people that are losing like leaky fluids, but I wouldn't think that blackberry root would be useful. Blackberry leaf, a little more stringent than some of our other fruit leaves. You can still use it. Just mind the taste. If you drink it and it gives you green banana mouth, then it's too astringent and it's not going to help as much. And you might want to dilute it or just use a little bit of it. But use your mouth as a guide when you're kind of using berry leaves, and see, because strawberry leaves are even less astringent than raspberry leaves, right? And so having that taste. You don't want to be feeling a pucker. You don't want to be feeling any green banana taste in your mouth, especially with your electrolyte solutions. Um, but the berries, on the other hand, they're acidic, right? They're sweet, they're acidic. Smush some berries in. I love hibiscus with some cinnamon, like hot, pour the hot water in, let it cool, take the hibiscus and cinnamon out, and then smush a bunch of berries in there, for that sensation of cooling, right? Because blackberries have they're tart. They're one of our more tart berries. Even when they're super, super fresh, they're going to have more tartness than other berries. So I would use the blackberry fruit if you're going to for hydration. You can use dehydrated cactus. Truly, I think that it might, if you're using cactus powder, it's going to form a gel, right? And so as long as I would use a little bit, and it doesn't always mix in. Like cactus powder tends to, if it's a tea powder concentrate, then it works, right? So if someone has made the fluid and then dehydrated it, cactus powder can tend to clump together, but you can try it. It will be hydrating. You just don't want to eat the dried powder because that will suck all the hydration out. Mhm. Let's see, what else do we have? Okay, talking about skin. We talked about increased sweating, what it can do to our skin. So we have this mixture of heat, right? So heat is an increase in function. Um, if we are hot for long enough, if our skin is hot for long enough, it is going to dry out. And so between sweating, being out in the sun, which is hot, it's heating up our skin, it's kind of drying up the oils. Sweat also washes away sebum, which is really, really important to keep to keep our skin soft, right? And we'll talk about the difference between moisturization and hydration and how our skin needs both. But unfortunately, the mixture of sweating and being out in the sun is dehydrating to skin and takes kind of away, takes that moisture and hydration away. So we have that the two-way bang there. So even beyond the surface of the skin, the heat effects can affect hydration and kind of skin barrier function. So we tend to lose more water in general. And that leaves our skin a little tight, even if it isn't dry. And it will often be tight, but feel like look oily on the surface. So that combination of surface oil with dehydration, with lack of moisture, can disrupt the skin's balance. So can make it more reactive, more prone to inflammation and irritation. We already talked about people with skin conditions. Heat can also make our skin more photosensitive in general, so more sensitive to the sun. So the hotter we are, the more sensitive to our skin is going to be to the sun and to the effects of sun. So there's some things we can do herbally. We can internally stay hydrated with our electrolyte solutions, our mineral-rich infusions, our lovely sour herbs, small amounts of those spice herbs to keep the blood flowing and keep us cool. Of course, protect our skin from the direct sun. But we can also use cooling, soothing topical herbs to help kind of buffer the stress that heat puts on our largest organ. So it's not always I'll talk about, before the end of class, I'll talk about how to support sunburn a little bit. But really it's about that prevention, right? That thinking about what your skin is going to need and integrating it into your everyday life. So we want to support our skin barrier. Um, the outer part of our skin is called the epidermis. It has the acid mantle and some other layers. And then we have these lower layers. So the dermis has the sweat glands, nerves, blood vessels. And then further down, unless you're getting an incredible sunburn, you're not going to be getting down into any other layers of the skin. So dry skin needs oil, right? We need sebum. We need, out to put outside oils on our skin. Dehydrated skin needs water. It needs, flower waters, hydrosols, aloe. That is what is going to bring moisture in. And like I said, hot weather strips both. So we want to rehydrate, putting in, I really like, there's a bunch of recipes in your notes for different types of hydrating sprays. I am a big fan of putting, getting your favorite hydrosol. I really like calendula because I have sensitive irritated skin. But rose is really lovely. I think lemon balm feels pretty good for most people. Um, so basically getting your favorite hydrosol, and per 8 ounces, putting in a good tablespoon of aloe and a teaspoon of glycerin. And that can be, and I like to keep it in the fridge. You need to use it up in 2 weeks. It'll last longer in the fridge, but if you're kind of carrying it around in your car with you or in your bag, it'll last a couple weeks. And that can bring it can refresh dehydrated skin throughout the day. Along with, if it's cold, it feels fantastic. Like, have you ever cut the grass and then came into cool hydrosol all over you? I'm like getting tingles just thinking about how good it is. But on top of that, on top of it just feeling fabulous, it will um, it will prevent your skin from dehydrating throughout the day. And we don't need to be continuously putting oil on throughout the day. We can think about that in the morning, kind of in the evening with your whatever skin routine that you have. But lightly refreshing your skin throughout the day and wiping the sweat away if you're sweating, if you sweat and then it dries, even with just plain water, just doing a quick splash. I also really, really love hibiscus, like I mentioned before, is really nourishing to irritated skin. Chamomile is fantastic, either as a hydrosol or as a tea. What else? Calendula is really, really fantastic. We do. You're going to have recipes, write-ups on all of the herbs and recipes that with most of the herbs I've talked about, we have a recipe for. And on top of some of these, we'll actually have time for me to talk about it at the end. On top of the kind of treatment based or like support, there's also some like really delicious, just really like fun, delicious things. Like I love Jello. I can't eat gelatin, but I do agar, and there's like herbal, like cooling herbal gels, and you know, if you like making skincare, there's some like fancier stuff you can make skincare wise. But really, even the basics. The goal is throughout the day to rehydrate, to keep to keep that moisture in the skin, and then to seal that moisture in, especially in the evening, with some sort of oil. And that is going to be really, really dependent on your skin and what feels good. Folks with not with skin that isn't like breakout prone, might be able to use a heavier oil. Some of us need something like jojoba oil, or I really, really like vegan squalene. So not the squalene that comes from sharks, but they make it from sugarcane and other things. But basically, making sure you're hydrating in the morning and putting a couple drops, just one or two little drops, to seal in. And the glycerin is doing a little bit of that through, in that spray, the hydrosol glycerin and aloe spray. It doesn't do it as deeply, and it doesn't soften as much as oil does. But you're holding in, the goal is to hold in that moisture throughout the day, and then to seal it in while you're sleeping and when you're away from kind of that heat and irritation. You don't want to put oil directly on sunburn, because if sunburn seals things in, um, sunburn is a condition of heat, right? So if my arm is sunburned and I touch it, it's going to feel warm. And so if I put oil on top of something that's already warm, not only is it going to hold in moisture, it's going to hold in some of that heat. Your pores aren't going to be able to open up and kind of disperse that heat. So if you are sunburned, stick to that kind of hydrating sprays and the herbs that we talked about, and wait until that initial, your skin is cool to the touch again. And then you can start putting some, you can put some of that moisture in with the oils. And if you do end up getting a sunburn, yep, switch to Thomas really likes a rose chamomile hydrosol. That's his favorite. Um, that's his favorite combo for cooling and for sunburn. Um, and then if you have access to calendula, it's kind of hard. A lot of places don't make the calendula hydrosol anymore. I looked for it before the class. You can also make tea out of calendula flowers, and pat that onto the sunburn. You can use, it's really lovely if you kind of soak, instead of poulticing, we don't need to put the whole, poulticing is when we're putting the herb directly on our skin. Compressing is when we're making a tea, straining it and soaking it. So you could soak a washcloth, or a towel. I don't know how much, depends on how much sunburn you have, in this tea, put it in the freezer for a minute, and then put it onto the parts of your body that are sunburned. So you're wanting to, not doesn't need to be icy. So don't leave it in there until it's hard, just like gentle coolness. And then of course, aloe. And then once the heat is gone, moving to like a calendula oil infused lotion, and unscented moisturizer, some of those oils, whatever oils work good for your skin. Does anybody have any favorite cooling herbs for skin or otherwise? Like mine's hibiscus. As you guys know, I've mentioned it 3 times. Aloe is really great. Yeah, the cool thing about aloe, like it's cooling, but it's also soothing to mucous membranes, right? So not that we all need that, right? But so let's say we are like, aloe helps things heal. It helps tissues heal inside and outside of the body. So it's, we're putting it on our sunburns, we're drinking it maybe in our rehydration, putting some in our rehydration and electrolyte mixes. And that if there is any irritation in your digestive tract, an added bonus would be that that's, kind of soothing of the mucous membranes, right? So we have cells, we have the lining of our digestive tract produces mucus. We have these enterocytes, we have these cells in our digestive tracts, and aloe helps with that. So does calendula. Yeah, so it's pretty cool. Thanks for coming, Alicia. It's if you want to catch the tail end, you're totally welcome to jump back into the classroom. There'll be a recording. Tiffany will put it up. Um, Ooh, chocolate mint. Chocolate mint's delicious. I don't think I've ever made an iced tea out of it, but I don't see why it wouldn't be fantastic. Aloe with lavender essential oil. Yeah, so we don't want to put oil on sunburn, but a couple of drops of diluted lavender in oil can be really nice for burns, burns of all types, but sunburns as well. It's a great idea, Tiffany. You can use plantain leaves or leaf infusion as a compress. So sometimes it's pretty, it can be astringent, right? And so if you're feeling like there's irritation and kind of damage, that's when I would be thinking about putting plantain on the skin more than just like overall like heat and moisture, moisture loss. Yes, calendula. All right. Has anyone had trouble sleeping when it's 1,000 degrees outside? I tell you what, I'll sometimes be hot and but not so hot. I know that I'm hot and I'm like, oh, I can't sleep. I can't sleep. I can't sleep. And then all of a sudden I realize I take a layer off and then I'm zonked out. And so there are some really specific reasons why that happens. Because getting sleep during hot summer nights can be challenging, especially if you don't have, if you're camping or you're sleeping outside or you don't have air conditioning, or in the case of the little house that I'm renting right now, it has a window unit and it can't always keep up with, with the heat. So our body naturally drops its core temperature by about 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit as it prepares for sleep. So not as we're preparing, not as we're brushing our teeth and washing our faces, but as we're laying down, kind of easing into sleep. So that part of that cooling process is what is triggering sleepiness. Not the whole thing, but part of it. So when it's too hot, our body struggles to achieve that natural temperature drop that we need to transition into sleep. And it also makes it harder to stay asleep. Ideal bedroom temperature is for most people, this can, there's some wiggle room, of course, but studies show that the ideal bedroom temperature for the average person is 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. That I don't know a lot. My house can't become that cold during the heat of August in the Midwest. And so there are some things that we can do to strategize. Um, these aren't necessarily, herbal things, but sharing some just things that we can think about along with some cooling sleep formulas. Well, I have one that I formulated initially for a client going through menopause and then realized when I make a new formula and it sounds good, I always, taste it and try it a little bit just to see how it feels in my body and realize that it just works when you're hot and trying to go to bed in general, when you have those kind of sensations of heat happening. So I'll share that recipe. So when it's, when we're hot in our bedrooms, it's important to circulate air. So even if the air isn't cool, moving the air will help with that sweat evaporation process, which will cool you down. And then you can deal with the sweat, herbally in all the ways that we talked about in the rehydration when you wake up in the morning. So that cross ventilation. So having a fan sucking hot air out of the room while another fan is blowing cool air at you. Sometimes cooling our pulse points can help. And this will work with a drop of, diluted mint oil too, like peppermint or spearmint essential oil diluted. So you can actually cool them down with some like ice or whatever. So, especially like your temples, like here and, on your wrists. You can cool those down with ice. You can also put a little bit of diluted mintiness, spearmint, peppermint, all the versions of that lemon balm essential oil would probably work too. Added benefit of the smell being linked to relaxation, especially for those of you that have a relationship with lemon balm already. Your brain already knows that that it'll relax you. Um, yeah, and so the other thing that's really important that not everyone knows is to use fabrics that are not that don't trap heat. So fabrics with polyesters, wool, flannel, those things that we kind of we generally understand that. But some folks don't know. You want to keep sheets maybe like cotton, percale, or linen, or as close to that as you can get. So you want the least amount of polyester for your summer sheets as possible, because polyester really, really, really holds the heat in and like next to your body. Uh, so when heat is interfering with sleep, there are a few herbs that I think about that can help address both the sensation of heat and that kind of grumpy sleep disruption, irritated, restless kind of moving around sleep, disruption that happens. And so I really like my standard cooling sleep formula is 2 parts hops tincture, 2 parts passion flower glycerite, so it can be a little sweet, calming without being warming. Hops tincture is very bitter, so it's a very cooling herb as well as being excellent for sleep. And peach tincture. So it's, 2 parts hops, 2 parts passion flower, traditional sleep herbs. None of that's going to be warming or moving. Passion flower is great for, we're always talking about hot or passion flower for circular thinking. I also think that it's really good for tossing and turning. Tossing and turning that isn't coming from a physiological response, like medication, restless legs, iron deficiency, magnesium deficiency, just that hot restlessness. So it works really well. And then 1 part peach. So we talked about it being, because of because of the amygdalin in peach, peach, leaves, pits, twigs, it can create a more lasting sensation of cooling for heat-related agitation. It likes to, it pulls heat, it soothes the irritation, and that works for the irritation of the mind, as well as irritation for the body. And something I didn't mention earlier is that, peach in small amounts is really safe for kids as well. So kids that are like red-faced and running around screeching and just like overactivated, a little bit of peach in some water, like 5 drops of peach tincture, peach um, um, pit tincture, or maybe to 10 drops if it's leaf or twig, will really cool it down. And it works for anyone who knows what I'm talking about when you're looking at a child that kind of has that mindset. Any adults that anytime you feel like that kid looks, peach works really well too. Um, yeah, so that formula, that's my favorite formula. And I like a nightcap, not in terms of alcohol, which we know is dehydrating and doesn't help with heat, but I like to have something to sip at night. And I really think that a lot of times, along with the heat, tea people, right? People that have, a hot beverage routine in the cooler months. Oh, thanks, Tiffany. uh, your body gets used to things. Our brains really love routine because they're energy efficient. You don't have to think about it if you're used to doing it. But I also think that our bodies miss having a nighttime beverage. And so I like to have a nightcap um, that of this cooling sleep formula with fizzy water, and sometimes I'll do a little sweetener. It depends how close to bed that's happening. I like the lime flavored fizzy water. Sometimes I'll splash some hibiscus into it, but basically creating a cooling beverage sleep routine when it's hot. If not everyone, some folks in the summer, it's, they're able to keep, they either really like or they're able to keep their houses so cool that this is not an issue, right? So if your house is super cool and you're going to bed and you're like almost chilly, which is a nice way, to go to sleep and you're still using blankets, it doesn't necessarily mean you need the cooling sleep formula or you need the to switch to iced drinks before you go to bed. But for anyone that gets like irritated in the summer, an excellent combo. And if you use passion flower glycerite instead of the tincture, then you're going to have some sweetness, some natural sweetness in that formula. Um, some other herbs that we talked about, that would be good to, you can make into a syrup or put some of the tincture into fizzy water. Chamomile and lemon balm are excellent for cooling, bedtime teas, for reasons we kind of already talked about. Excuse me. As well as lavender. So a lot of folks find lavender too warming, but used in small amounts or in another cooling, with other cooling herbs. So just not, you're not going to brew a whole chamomile tea, but maybe, 10 or 15 drops of chamomile tincture in with everything else can create that relaxation piece that's needed, that additional piece to kind of that, I think that lavender can promote contentment. And so that works. It also, you can, make a mist, you can mist your pillows or, mist your bedding before you get in with a little bit of something mixed with lavender oil or chamomile or lemon balm. So that can help too. Well, let's see. Is there any formulas? Does anyone have any questions? We're getting towards the end here. Now I mostly just have some fun recipes that we can talk about. A hydrofoil? I don't know if I know. Am I stuffy? And am I saying hydrosol, but I'm stuffy, so it sounded like hydrofoil, or is that oh, so a hydrosol is a byproduct of the essential oil making, right? And so you have, in distillation, we have the water running through these herbs, condensing, and then it's pulling out the essential oil, and what's left over is almost like it's not just essential oil added to water. Like the essential oils have been bonded into the water. And honestly, I'm not a distiller, so I can't explain. They aren't easy to make if you don't have a distillation. There is a process that you can make with very aromatic herbs like lavender or rose. You can basically get a pot and put ice on the top of a pot. And I can add that to notes for folks that want to make. This isn't going to work really well unless the herbs are super aromatic, like aromatic fresh rose, lavender, holy basil works. So you can make them yourself. They're not going to be as potent and they won't last quite as long outside of the fridge, but they work. Absolutely. It was a classic way for folks to make rose flower water. Hi, Maria. So question about I am familiar with Sjogren's syndrome and how it affects the moisture producing glands in the body. It's a little bit too complicated of a question to kind of get into um, the nitty gritty of that. There's a lot of things we do herbally. That's more of like um, clinical herbalism and a comprehensive formula. But overall, the goal for soothing is slime. So demulcents, right? And so lots and lots of moisture in teas. You can do herbal eye washes with very well strained demulcents. I know in Sjogren's, very oftentimes the eyes are affected, the mouth is affected. And so part of that's symptom management, right, is to continue to add that kind of those polysaccharides back in to help with moisture. um, So that's what I would try to start, depending on the symptoms. It'll help moisturize your digestive tract. You can use that, you can also use those for the skin. Um, and really in terms of supporting Sojourn's root causes, we are going to be, you would be working with a clinical herbalist to work on the root causes of autoimmunity while supporting the system. So that's kind of how Thomas and I work on autoimmunity. We're working on the root causes and diving into all of those, and then we're easing symptoms and supporting the body while we're working on those root causes. Excuse me. Curious about herbs that can be used for overheating related to POTS. Um, So the sensation of heat that comes with pots you can use the same herbs because you're still, as we kind of talked about in the beginning, the herbs, cooling herbs are kind of hijacking our thermocooling sensory somatic system. So even though that cause is different, even though, pots, there's other things going on, when your heart rate is changing rapidly, then that can cause a process of kind of cold, that's sweating with clamminess, which is a little bit different. But that sensation of heat, if it doesn't go away, all of the same herbs that we talked about are helpful for POTS. And I would say everything we talked about I can't think of anything that I talked about that I wouldn't, that I would avoid in POTS. And we know in POTS, it's really, 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 really important to have electrolytes and sodium. And so that's always going to be a part of the process in general. Um, yeah, definitely. All right. Does anybody have any favorite like cooling recipes? Like I said, I'll talk about for a minute. We're gonna pretty much end in a minute, but I was gonna maybe think about a couple recipes that I really love. Let's see. Ooh, one other good one. Honey aloe popsicles. So very, very simple. I like to do this with coconut water. You could just maybe do it with regular water if you want. Um, half a cup of aloe juice, 1 cup of coconut water with a few tablespoons of honey. And then you can get so many different cute little like popsicle molds. You can get them on Amazon, you can get them at Target. They're very popular now. You can also just use an ice cube and a toothpick, which is what I remember doing when I was a teenager, or when I was young. We would just make weird popsicles with that, or getting popsicle sticks. But the aloe, you can also put in the aloe pops are really good with some pureed fruit on top of it. But I love a good popsicle in the summer, but I really don't like the kind of sweet, overly sugary prepared ones. But they're the aloe honey combo, and you can even use, for those of you that live in the desert, or if you just really like that kind of double dose of succulents, you could use agave instead of honey and get that. I've even put a pinch of cayenne in to get that kind of that sweat body moving in. So if you like a little sweet and spicy, don't put much. I'm talking like not even an eighth of a teaspoon, just like a little pinch in there. Tinctures are safe for kids. Yep. None of those you're using in like large enough amounts. So the dosage of the cooling sleep formula for adults is, anywhere from 2 to 4 droppers. I would say that I do not often give hops to kids. But if a kid was really hot and uncomfortable and needed to go to sleep, I would still use this. It wouldn't be something I would use every night. I might think of something a little more specific to, especially if they're young. Teenagers over 12, totally fine. Littles, absolutely you can try a dropper to help them cool down, but probably there would be gentler. Hops is just a really strong herb. And kids have such a high metabolism anyway, and it's pretty bitter that it might actually make them hungry or wake up. But everything else that I talked about, yep, super safe for kids. I just put them in a little water. Just because the alcohol taste is icky for some kids. Most of the things we talked about, we don't make peach I don't think that peach is good as a glycerite. So, but almost everything else that we talked about can be either made as a tea or a glycerite. Like lemon balm, fantastic. I prefer the glycerite over the tincture, to be honest. I think that it pulls the glycerin pulls aromatics pretty well. And kids generally like that kind of sweet taste too. Well, all right, everyone. I think that, as we talked about, there's a lot of things that can happen, a lot of ways that we can integrate, herbs into our lives when it gets hot out. And I hope that you guys, everyone got something out of this class and that you enjoy the notes. So yeah, that's it. Have a great evening, and we look forward to seeing you all at our next free class.
Thank
Mhm.